Okay, so we're going to now talk about how populations interact with each other in an ecosystem, and also how that populations interact with the abiotic components of the ecosystem. So here's two new words that are really important. Habitat. Habitat is the actual place in the ecosystem that the population lives, or an individual in the population. And the niche is how it functions. It's like its role in the ecosystem. Like, what does it eat? What does it take from the physical aspects? What does it give back to the physical aspects of the ecosystem? Who feeds on it? That could be its role too. So niche is like the role, the occupation, what it does in the ecosystem. And the habitat is its residence, where it lives. The location where it does its activities. Now, the habitat can be a very specific part of an ecosystem, or it can be the whole ecosystem. So, the different kinds of big picture habitats are listed here, some of them. And I don't see a big difference between ecosystem and habitat, really. Now, for small things, small living things, the habitat is, of course, like a microhabitat. Like, even medium-sized things, like birds, will reside in a certain part of the forest or on the edge of the forest. So habitat is really a general term, but you can talk about microhabitats as well. Okay, so the habitats are like almost like the biomes that you learn maybe in grade school. The desert, forest, grasslands, prairies, and savannas. Savannas are like grasslands, but they'll have some trees scattered with shrubs and grasses. That's like what you have between deserts and jungles in tropical places. Scrubland, these are like the little forest in Florida. You got sandy soil, you got grasses, you got trees. Like in Florida, you have like palm trees and oak trees, maybe pine trees as well. Some habitats are underneath the ground, subterranean. So if anything grows in them at the openings of their holes, might be moss and lichen. So these are animals that have that kind of habitat. In Florida, the gopher tortoise makes their home underneath the ground, and they eat plants outside their underground home. Wetlands. This is a big variety of things. It could be rivers, the shores of rivers. It could be in the river. It could be in ponds, retention ponds, or around the retention ponds. It could be in lakes, on the side of the lakes, or inside the lake. Then marine is wetlands, but saltwater. So we got mangroves, we got seagrass beds, we got different sections of the ocean that are uniquely different from each other and have different algae and microorganisms and fish feeding there and all that. So these are just general biome type habitats. There are, of course, other ones. There's the ice caps and the glaciers. Those are habitats to like penguins and some kinds of algae that can grow in the ice. Seals, walruses, etc. And again, the niche is the role the individuals in a population have in the habitat it lives in. The type of food it eats, how it obtains this food, what time that it feeds, how it changes the habitat. For example, does he live in a hole in a tree? Does it make a nest? Does it build a hive? So how it affects the habitat that it lives in. Not exactly where it lives. That's kind of, that's been defined as the habitat. How it affects the habitat. Does he, like a woodpecker, peck holes in the tree to get insects in it? And then how it reproduces, what times of the year it reproduces. There's all kinds of other things what that can be described as defining the niche of the organisms in a population. For example, what does it take out of the environment? How does it affect the environment? What does it add to the environment? How it interacts with other populations, other species. So, unless there's symbiotic relationship where two different species are living together and helping each other, or maybe hurting each other. We'll talk about that coming up. But general rule is no two species can occupy the same niche because one will outcompete the other. So this is called the exclusion principle. So two different species can't occupy the same niche. They can't do the same role because they're competing with each other. This is why we have so much diversity, biodiversity, because if we didn't, there would be too much competition for the same food and space in a habitat. So, for example, a tree is not one habitat for one species. We have what is called niche partitioning. Partitioning means subdividing. So, in different parts of a specific tree, different birds will make their nest or feed so that on insects, so that there won't be competition and more individuals can take advantage of the resources provided by the habitat. So the tree can be considered a microhabitat, or part of the habitat, because birds, of course, fly other places, but they pick trees in certain areas of the tree or forest. Some are specialists for the floor underneath the tree, the forest floor. Some are specialists for the fringe of the forest where the forest meets the field. Some birds are nocturnal. I mean, some animals, not just birds, like an owl. They feed at night. And some are diurnal, like hawks. They feed during the day and sleep at night. Okay, so that's different niches in a habitat. It doesn't have to be an actual place, it can be a time as well. Now, different populations in a community, remember, is the biotic part of an ecosystem. So you have different populations, different species interacting with each other. So they can interact in ways such as competition for food. They can interact in such a way that they're being pursued by a predator. They would be the prey then, or they're the predator eating another prey. So that's the interaction. And they could live together in certain relationships. We call that living together of two species, symbiosis. And we'll talk about that in pretty much detail. So these are some examples of competition between different populations in a community. So here we see a lion kills a zebra, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of other animals, other species coming in to get their free food after the lion did the work. Vulture, hyenas. I hear hyena. Vultures are coming in. Okay, so everyone's competing for the food there. Okay, in the plant kingdom, of course, plants primarily compete for the light in the forest. So without the light, you're not going to be able to photosynthesize and grow. Plants also compete for the nutrients in the soil. And some plants compete for pollinators to help them transfer their pollen from their flowers to another individual in their species, so that you don't have self-fertilization, rather you have that shuffling of the genes when pollen from one flower fertilizes the egg of another flower in the same population of that species of flower. That leads to genetic variation, which, protects the population in case there's a change in the environment. There'll be enough variation to have some survivors carry on the population. Okay, competition can be, we've been talking about interspecies competition, and that is where one species competes with another species. That's interspecific. But of course, there's intraspecific too. Intraspecific means like intramurals, when our school competes with each other, teams that compete with each other in sports. Okay, so intraspecific is individuals in the same population are competing. So here's an example of intraspecific. These polar bears probably are competing for a mate, or they're protecting their territory and fighting it out. Plants, of course, will have intraspecific competition with each other for the space to spread their leaves and get enough sunlight to grow. Okay, so the competition or the exclusion principle, or to call it the competition exclusion principle, I already stated. No two organisms can occupy the same niche in a habitat. One will outcompete the other. Okay, so here we have two kinds of a protozoan called a paramecium. They actually live in the same place, the same time, eat the same food as each other. So if you have that kind of habitat and you put a few of that kind of paramecium in that habitat, you'll see a population grows like that. And the same with another species of paramecium, a protist. You'll get a growth like that. Now, that's when they're alone, not mixed. If you mix them together, a few individuals of the green species and a few of the purple species, let's say, what will happen is one of the species will thrive and the other species will be outcompeted and excluded. So this is because the species that's thriving has adaptations that allow it to get the food better, quicker, more efficiently than the other species adaptations. Okay, so predator-prey interactions occur between different species of animals, and basically that's just one animal eating another animal, a carnivore. The predator is the hunter, and the hunted is the prey. So just don't think of big animals as being predators or hawks. Insects are predators too. They eat other animals. Insects are animals. You'll learn that if you don't know that already. And there's so many. When you have a food web, all those arrows in the food web are pointing to the predator and coming from the prey. So like in this one, the beetle is eating a worm, earthworm. So what we would have is this kind of situation as part of the food web. And the food web is very complicated with all these arrows because there's so many predator-prey relationships. Okay, so we're going to show what the population curves of predator and prey do. over time. So what's the predator? This is the bobcat or the lynx, I guess. And the prey is the rabbit or hare. Here we have a graph of the populations of the hare population, which is the prey, of the lynx, which is the predator. And the predator would be the pink one, and the purple one's the rabbit. So what we see is we start out here, and this is time, over time. So if we start out with a, let's see, again, purple is the prey, the rabbit. We start out with a lot of rabbits, not so many lynxes, predators. So as a predator with a lot of rabbits, the predator population will grow, but as the predator population grows, the prey population will drop. This will cause the in a time after, not right away, but what will happen is the larger population of predators will now start to decline because there's not enough food. They over hunted the prey. So the predators will go somewhere else, or they'll decrease their population. They won't have as many birds, and they'll have more of them dying because they're hungry. If they can't move on. And as the predator population decreases, we see the prey population starting to increase again. And the predator population will then increase with that increase in food source. But then it'll reach another peak, and it will cause the prey population to start declining. So it oscillates back and forth between population growth and population decline. Okay, so let's do some review questions. The Venus flytrap is a plant that can eat spiders and insects. They can, of course, produce food by photosynthesis, but this gives them nitrogen when the soil where they're growing is lacking that nutrient. So trapping and eating the bugs is a Venus flytrap. It's not its habitat where it lives, it's its occupation, what it does in the place it lives. So it's the niche. Competition occurs when organisms struggle to survive by working against others to obtain resources. Oh, that makes sense. So they're not showing coral here, but coral is an organism that secretes a calcium shell. You've seen coral. And there's little pores in the coral where a little organism, invertebrate, lives, a filter feeder. But in his body, there lives symbiotically algae, and those algae provide food for the coral organism, the little invertebrate that lives in those pores and secretes those calcium things that we know as coral. Um, the phytoplankton has a safe place to live, and the coral organism gets food from and nutrients from the phytoplankton that lives in its body. Now, when the water temperature gets too warm or there's pollution, stressors like that will cause the coral to eject those plankton. The plankton will those phytoplankton, those photosynthetic algae organisms, and this causes the coral to bleach because the things that's giving us the color, the phytoplankton, has left, and it causes the coral to be sickly because it's not getting all the nutrients it needs, and it can actually kill off the coral. So anyway, this funky looking sea star, or starfish as we call them, eats the coral. So if coral bleaching destroys the coral in the ecosystem, what will happen to the crown of thorns sea star population? Well, they're the predator, and the coral is the prey. So if their prey decreases, well, these starfish will have to find another place. Their population in that habitat will also decrease. Okay, so osprey. We have those on campus. They live on top of the stadium lights. Sometimes you see their nest. Okay, they'll feed on fish. So osprey are the predator. Fish are the prey. Suppose you take away the stadium lights or the parking lot with the big lights on it. So only half the ospreys remain. This would result in the fish population, the prey, doing what? Well, it's kind of obvious. If the predators decrease, the prey will increase. So you get more fish in that little pond or in the bay where the ospreys get their fish. Okay, these tree frogs live in southeastern United States near bodies of water. Okay, this is the frogs. Well, it's not its niche, it's the place it lives. Habitat. Okay, this is describing the hyena's lifestyle. That's not the place it lives, it's what they're living for in Africa, yeah. But how they live is the niche. Okay, this is not describing how the Venus flytrap lives, but rather where it lives, describing its habitat. Okay, deer and squirrels are obviously different species, so they're both competing for acorns. So this would be competition. What kind of competition? Well, because they're different species, it's between the species. So it's interspecific. Intra would be if the squirrels were fighting it off or competing with each other, which they are, to eat acorns. But between deers and squirrels, that's two different populations, two different species fighting for the same resource. Okay, male deer. Okay, I'm assuming they're the same species. And that's what dare do to protect their territory from another male, so that other male doesn't hoarding on his female. This is an example of intra, within the species, competition, and that competition is for a mate. A lion killing and eating a zebra, well, that's a predator-prey interaction. A vine grows on a mulberry tree, taking some of the light from the tree. Well, a vine and a tree, the mulberry tree, are different species. So this is competing for light, and it's enters between the species competition. Okay, these are two male sheep, bighorn sheep, that are in a headbutting contest. And really, that's just a display to have a female who's watching pick the male that pushes the other one further away on the headbutt. It's almost kind of a courtship ritual thing, not between the two males, but between the males and the females that are watching. Okay, so this is within the species competing for the mate. So this would be intraspecific competition. Letter A. Predator-prey interaction result from animals trying to... No. They're not looking for shelter, they're looking for food, or from escaping from someone who's trying to eat them. So that's totally false. Now we're going to talk about a specific kind of inter-specific relationship, symbiosis. And it's always a relationship between different species. There's three kinds of symbiosis. Again, symbiosis is the interaction of different species, interspecific, in which the two species live closely together and interact with each other. So symbiosis could be mutualistic or mutualism, where both species benefit from the association. Both get benefits. Commensalism is symbiosis, where one species gets the benefit and the other doesn't get anything from it, but he doesn't get any gain from it either. Then parasitism obviously is when one gets all the benefit and the other one actually gets hurt. He's harmed by that relationship. So we have the parasite is like the predator almost, and the host organism is the prey, the host. If you want to look at it that way, it's very similar to that, except it wouldn't be a good relationship if the parasite killed the host. Rather, a good parasite-host relationship from the perspective of the parasite would be to keep on sucking the energy out of the host, but not letting the host die. Here is a picture of a kind of strange mutualistic symbiosis where both species benefit. In this case, these leafcutter ants and the fungus that grows in their nest. So in their nest, these ants will go out and harvest the leaves and of a certain kind of tree, and it'll bring those leaves into its nest, and those leaves will be food for the fungus, and the fungus will break down the leaves as they digest them, and the proteins and sugars that they secrete will feed the ant. So the ant gets something out of it, and the fungus gets something out of it. The leaves don't. The tree with the leaves getting cut off probably isn't affected, but we're looking at the relationship between the ants and the fungus. The clownfish here is in a sea anemone or anemone, and the sea anemone is an animal that invertebrate that has poisonous stingers in those tentacles, but the clownfish has an adaptation that allows it to be immune to those stingers, and the sea anemone won't trigger those stingers with that kind of fish. So the fish benefits from being protected from other predators, and he protects the sea anemone from other fish that could eat the tentacles because they're immune to the toxin. What else? He also brings food to the sea anemone. His leftovers, his crumbs, as it were, as he eats, is absorbed by these tentacles of the sea anemone. Okay, so we've already talked about pollination as pollinators and flowers, the flowers that they pollinate, as a mutualistic symbiosis between the pollinator and the flowering plant. Okay, so bees get the pollen and nectar from flowers and bring it to their hive, and that's what is turned into honey for the baby bees, the eggs, the fertilized eggs in the hive to feed on. Then the flowers are pollinated. That's the other end of the deal. The flowers get pollinated because the bee brings the pollen from one flower to another flower in the same species, and it rubs off his body and fertilizes the egg of that visited flower. Big deal. What does that do? That causes different alleles to be transferred to another flower. So a flower will not be self-fertilized. It'll be cross-fertilized with other flowers in the same population when a pollinator visits it. Okay, so this is both get something out of it. The flower gets that shuffling of genes that will lead to more variety in the genes of the pollinated flowers. So in our large intestine, we have colonies of different kinds of bacteria living there on the walls of our large intestine, and they're very important for keeping the bad bacteria out of us that might come in on the food and might not be killed by the stomach acid. And they provide vitamins as they feed on the waste products passing through the large intestine. This is telling us right here, mother's breast milk is kind of a benefit rather than just formula milk, because in the breast milk, the bacteria in the mom's gut is actually transferred to the milk glands and given to the baby to protect the little babies, to have it grow in the baby's gut so that it can provide vitamins from the milk she's giving him, her. Okay, termites can eat wood, cellulose, but on their own they can't digest it. In their guts lives protists that they call them microbes, but they're protists that can break down the cellulose into sugar, into glucose. And so the termite gets some of that glucose and sugar. That's how it feeds. It provides the wood fibers that it's eaten to the protist in its gut, and those protists eat those wood particles, break down the cellulose, form into glucose, which feeds the termite. Also, it's a nice safe place for the microbes. So there's a two-way benefit there for both parties. So let's talk about commensalism. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship between two species. One gets all the benefits, the other doesn't really get any harm or benefit at all. So, for example, a squirrel making his home in a hole on a tree. Okay, so that doesn't hurt the tree at all. He doesn't care if the squirrel's in there. No skin off his teeth, as it were. So, but it provides shelter for a squirrel, and he can grow his family. He and she can grow their family in that hole. The tree is unharmed, so it's commensalism. Okay, so you've seen these birds. They're called cattle egrets. And what they do is eat insects. And around cows, there's a lot of flies and stuff. And there's cow piles, where that flies are around. So they don't really eat any pest that are sitting on flies. They don't take it off their bodies. But as the cows walk around, they stir up the insects in the grass. And so these cattle egrets hang around the cows in order to eat those insects. The cows don't care. The cows really aren't getting anything from it, even though you might think, well, if they eat flies, they're protecting the cow from fly bites. But that's not the point. They eat any insects that the cow stirs up as he's walking around, or she's walking around. So the great benefits, the cow doesn't get anything from it. So that's commensalism. So jackals, I guess, hang out where tigers, after tigers make a kill, but they're not going to compete until the tiger walks away. And then, though, that's not competition. He's just eating the leftovers. So it doesn't harm the tiger or benefit the tiger that he's there. But it benefits the jackal. So that's commensalism. Example of commensalism. Now, parasitism is, like I said, when one party gets harmed, the other party gets benefit from that harm. So sometimes you see these clumps. This is not Spanish moss. These round clumps is mistletoe. In Florida, you see that. And it sucks the sap out of the host tree. So it's damaging the tree. And so the tree's getting hurt, but the mistletoe's getting everything, all the benefits. Spanish moss isn't really a parasite. It just hangs on the trees. Now, if it gets really heavy on a tree, it could break off a branch, or it could prevent leaves on the tree from getting sunlight. But Spanish moss really isn't damaging the tree as mistletoe is. Here's the ticks. If you ever had one tick bite, they get on you and they suck your blood. And they also can, just taking your blood is harming you. You might say, no, I'm just losing a little blood, but the point is, they also carry diseases like Lyme disease, which can really wreak havoc on your health. So they are parasites. They're spiders in the spider family. So because the host is harmed and the tick is benefited, this is parasitism, a type of symbiosis. Okay, so if you drink water that you haven't boiled from like a river or a pond, or filtered with a really good filter, you can get really bad diarrhea. And because these guys are parasites in the water, they live in your gut and they take the nutrients out and they put toxins in there. And so it harms the host, but it benefits this is a protist. Okay, it benefits this little microbe. So obviously, I'm hurt. The little microbe is benefited. That's parasitism. Okay, barnacles live on the fins of whales and also on the bottoms of boats. So barnacles act like a transport system for the barnacles. Barnacles do not help or harm the whales. It doesn't slow them down because they're so big, like it slows boats down. What relationship is this? Well, whales not getting any benefit or harm, but the barnacle is getting benefits because he gets to go where the whale finds food, and then they can break off there, and the whale has plenty of plate of food in where he gets dropped off. So one benefits, the other doesn't get harmed. That is called commensalism. Okay, these guys, these birds right here, actually peck off like the leeches that get on hippos. Hippos are parasites, and they can carry diseases like ticks do. Hippos can get ticks too, and these birds, oxpeckers, will eat the parasite, and he's actually eating the blood that's in the parasite from the host hippo. So what kind of thing is this? Well, the hippo's benefiting, and the oxpecker is benefiting, so that's mutualism. Mutually beneficial mutualism, what happens? Both get a benefit.